Let's talk about something we've all been feeling in our wallets lately: inflation. It's that sneaky force that seems to be creeping into every aspect of our lives, making everything just a bit more expensive. Remember when you could buy a gallon of milk without needing a small loan? Yeah, me neither. Those days feel like a distant memory, don't they? Inflation, in the simplest terms, is when things get more expensive. It's like a slow, invisible tax that eats away at your purchasing power. Your dollar doesn't stretch as far as it used to. What once bought you a cart full of groceries now barely covers the essentials. It's like that friend who keeps borrowing money and never pays you back. Only this time the friend is the economy, and the money is your hard-earned cash. Except in this case, the friend is the economy, and the money is your purchasing power. And it's not just a small amount, it's a significant chunk of your budget. And let me tell you folks, this ain't your grandma's inflation. This is a whole new level of economic challenge that we're facing today. We're talking about prices skyrocketing on everything from groceries, which are basic necessities, to gas, which fuels our daily commutes, to housing, which is a fundamental need for every family. Remember that dream vacation you were saving for? The one where you could finally relax and unwind? Inflation is now a staycation in your own backyard. Those travel plans have been put on hold indefinitely. This isn't just an economic problem, it's a real-life struggle affecting millions of Americans every single day. Families are finding it harder to make ends meet. We're about to dive deep into the wacky world of inflation and see what's really going on. We'll explore the causes, the effects, and what we can do to navigate these turbulent times. Now, before we get all riled up about rising prices, let's talk about how we even measure this slippery beast called inflation. It's not as straightforward as it might seem. The government uses something called the Consumer Price Index, or CPI, to track the average change in prices over time. This index is crucial for understanding how the cost of living is evolving. Think of the CPI as a giant shopping cart filled with all the things we buy: food, clothes, rent, haircuts, you name it. It's a comprehensive basket that aims to represent the typical consumer's spending. The government tracks the prices of these items each month and compares them to the previous month. This ongoing comparison helps to identify trends and shifts in the economy. The difference, expressed as a percentage, is your inflation rate. This rate is a key indicator of economic health, influencing everything from interest rates to wages. Sounds simple, right? Well, here's where things get a little fishy. The CPI basket isn't exactly a perfect reflection of what we're actually buying. For one thing, it doesn't fully account for changes in our spending habits. Our preferences and needs evolve, and the CPI might not keep up with these changes. For example, it doesn't always include the latest tech gadgets or new services that become essential over time. This can lead to an underestimation of the true cost of living. Remember when everyone was panic buying toilet paper in 2020? That sudden spike in demand probably skewed the CPI a bit, wouldn't you say? Such anomalies can distort the data, making it less reliable for short-term analysis. Plus, the CPI doesn't always capture the full impact of price increases on different income groups. Lower-income households might feel the pinch more than wealthier ones, but the CPI treats all spending as equal. While the CPI is a useful tool, it's not without its flaws. Understanding its limitations helps us better grasp the complexities of inflation and its impact on our daily lives. The CPI is like that friend who means well but can be a little clueless sometimes. It's supposed to be a reliable indicator of inflation, but some economists argue that it actually underestimates the true cost of living. How is that possible, you ask? Well, let's break it down. One major criticism of the CPI is that it uses something called hedonic adjustments. Sounds fancy, right? Basically, it means that the government tries to account for improvements in product quality when calculating inflation. For example, if the price of a TV goes up, but the new model has a bigger screen and better resolution, the government might adjust the price downward to reflect the perceived increase in value. On paper, this makes sense, but in reality, it can mask the true impact of price increases on consumers. Just because a new TV has more pixels doesn't mean you can afford to buy it. Another sneaky trick up the CPI's sleeve is something called substitution bias. This is the assumption that when the price of one good goes up, consumers will simply switch to a cheaper alternative. If the price of beef goes through the roof, The government assumes you'll just eat more chicken instead. Problem solved, right? Well, not quite. First of all, not everyone can afford to switch to more expensive alternatives. And second, it ignores the fact that people have preferences. You might love steak, but you can't just replace it with chicken and expect the same level of satisfaction. It's like saying, hey, your favorite band just tripled their concert ticket prices. No problem. Just go see a cover band instead. See, it doesn't quite work that way, does it? The shrinking dollar when more money buys you less. Now let's talk about the real-world consequences of all this inflation mumbo-jumbo. The most obvious impact is the shrinking purchasing power of your hard-earned dollars. Remember when you could buy a decent cup of coffee for under $5? Those days are long gone, my friends. And it's not just coffee. Food prices have been soaring, making it harder for families to put dinner on the table. Gas prices are enough to give you a panic attack every time you fill up your tank. And don't even get me started on the housing market. Renting or buying a home has become a luxury that fewer and fewer Americans can afford. This isn't just an inconvenience, it's a full-blown crisis. People are struggling to make ends meet, and the American dream is slipping further out of reach for many. The Fed's balancing act, taming inflation without crushing growth. So, who's to blame for this inflationary mess? Well, it's complicated. Some economists argue that the Federal Reserve, our nation's central bank, has been too loose with its monetary policy in recent years. By keeping interest rates low and pumping money into the economy, the Fed may have inadvertently fueled inflation. Think of it like this. Imagine you're watering your plants. A little water is good. It helps them grow. But too much water can drown them. The same goes for the economy. On the other hand, some experts argue that the current inflation surge is largely due to factors outside the Fed's control, such as supply chain disruptions, the war in Ukraine, and increased consumer demand. It's like trying to drive a car with a flat tire and blaming the steering wheel. Government spending and inflation. A recipe for disaster? Of course, we can't talk about inflation without mentioning government spending. When the government spends more than it takes in through taxes, it has to borrow money, which can lead to inflation. It's like putting everything on a credit card and then wondering why your interest payments are so high. Now, I'm not saying that all government spending is bad, but when spending gets out of control, it can have serious consequences for the economy, including inflation. It's all about finding the right balance. The real cost of inflation beyond the price tag. The real tragedy of inflation is that it disproportionately affects those who can least afford it. Low and middle-income families are hit hardest by rising prices because they spend a larger portion of their income on essentials like food, housing, and transportation. When these prices go up, it eats away at their already stretched budgets. Inflation can also erode savings and investments, making it harder for people to build wealth and plan for the future. It's like trying to run up an escalator that's going down. You have to work twice as hard just to stay in the same place. Demand transparency, shining a light on the true cost of living. So, what can we do about this inflationary mess? It's a question on everyone's mind as we see prices rising across the board, from groceries to gas and even housing. The impact is felt by all, but especially by those living paycheck to paycheck. Well, for starters, we need more transparency from the government about how it calculates inflation. The numbers we see reported often don't reflect the reality of everyday expenses for most people. The CPI, while well-intentioned, may not be giving us the full picture. It often excludes critical items like housing costs and health care, which are significant parts of our monthly budgets. We need a more accurate and comprehensive measure of the true cost of living. This means including all the essentials that families need to survive and thrive, not just a select few. We also need to have an honest conversation about the role of government policy in driving inflation. Policies that may seem beneficial in the short term can have long-term consequences that hurt the average citizen. Both monetary and fiscal policy can have a significant impact on prices. When the government prints more money or increases spending, it can lead to higher inflation, which erodes our purchasing power. And we need to make sure that our leaders are making responsible decisions that don't come at the expense of everyday Americans. It's crucial that we hold them accountable for their actions. Ultimately, tackling inflation requires a multifaceted approach that addresses both the supply and demand side of the equation. This means looking at how we can increase production and reduce costs. We need to find ways to ease supply chain bottlenecks, increase domestic production, and promote competition. By doing so, we can help bring down prices and make goods more affordable for everyone. At the same time, we need to be mindful of government spending. Excessive spending can lead to higher debt levels, which can further exacerbate inflationary pressures, and ensure that it's not adding fuel to the inflationary fire. Responsible fiscal policy is key to maintaining economic stability and protecting the purchasing power of our currency. This isn't a problem with an easy fix, folks. It requires a concerted effort from all sectors of society, including government, businesses, and individuals. But by demanding transparency, holding our leaders accountable, and pushing for policies that benefit the many rather than the few, and working together, we can navigate these challenging economic times. It's about coming together as a community and supporting one another through these tough periods and build a brighter future for all Americans. Stay informed, stay engaged, and keep the conversation going. The more we know, the better equipped we are to make a difference. And most importantly, stay vigilant. Our future depends on the actions we take today.